I'm laying out Senate Bill 2, the Texas Education Freedom Act. This legislation, it feels familiar, and it should. The Senate passed this legislation 4 times in 2023, but here we are again, and I appreciate your focus and attention because the students of Texas deserve it. Senate Bill 2 finally brings Texas in line with 32 other states, both with Republican and Democrat governors and Republican and Democrat legislatures in those states, offering expanded education freedom to our students and our families. I often say the future of Texas beyond the dinner table with family and faith and conversation and instruction from parents first. The future of Texas begins beyond that in the classroom. And that remains true. If we're being honest with ourselves as elected officials and our constituents, we know that a one-size-fits-all education does not work for many of our students in Texas. Too many families find themselves trapped by their zip code or have a special need that would otherwise allow them in a different educational setting to thrive and advance. Because at the end of the day, many of our Texas students need options and variations on their learning environment, options that suit their needs the most. And we see that day in and day out now with the current options that are available in Texas. As we all know, that we have, many times it's been said, we have many choices now. Senate Bill 2 will serve more students this time around with more funding than ever, allowing nearly 100,000 students to receive an education savings account that would be larger than any other state's school choice program in the first year of operation. So, for instance, we would be 25 and 28 years behind Florida and Arizona, respectively, in their school choice options where they valued their students at the top of the priority list for the available resources that could be given to them, and we haven't. Senate Bill 2 builds upon the last version of this legislation from the 88th Legislature special sessions that we all supported. Well, many members on this dais supported, some did not, right? Want to be fair about that. As a result, the key provisions that we've worked on, like our anti-fraud provision safeguards, mandatory criminal history checks for any vendors, rigorous reporting requirements, and robust data protections, they're retained or expanded. And we'll explain a little bit more about what that exactly means. Just as prior iterations of this legislation, parents can direct their students' approved funds to pre-approved providers, but never have direct possession of the dollars themselves, and no reimbursements are permitted. That is why you can call it a voucher, and I understand the nomenclature is easy and it rolls off the tongue, but it's not a voucher. It's an education savings account that's not just political terminology designed to sound better or different. It's not a voucher. The reason why Florida has a voucher and an education savings account, the reason why Florida has both is because they're different. Otherwise, they wouldn't have both, right? So Senate Bill 2 is fully universal. So there's $200 million appropriated in Senate Bill 2 for a fully universal population in and of itself. A fully universal on eligibility population in and of itself. And then beyond that $200 million universal population, which in and of itself would be close to the largest launch in American history for a school choice plan, beyond that, there's another $800 million for special needs and free and reduced lunch eligible certain poverty level threshold kids that need help. And they are the priority set at the top of the weighted funds available within the framework, as it should be. If the number of applicants do not exceed the available revenue, then everyone is approved. Because we have a certain framework and we're expecting a certain amount of demand, but we're not sure about that. We don't know that the number of moms and dads that we expect to need and want these choices on behalf of their students will apply. And we've got a great framework set up through the comptroller with funding to not only promote the program to families so they'll know that it exists, but we've got an incredible framework to support those families once and if they're approved. The approval would be by a lottery pick because, again, we're not the federal government, right? We don't print another $1 trillion every time we have a problem, right? So there will be some today that think the program should be larger. I think we're going to have a witness that says that today that all 6 million students in Texas should receive a $10,000 ESA immediately. That's a $53 billion funding effort for 1 year. And the capacity and the operational logistics to even fathom that would be impossible to carry out. So, but there will be testimony today for such a thing. We work within scarce dollars. And speaking of that, the funds for the education savings account, they don't come from public education. In fact, we have a separate bill with an incredible historic lift for public education that, just like last session, for 90% of the regular session in the Senate, had no connection whatsoever to the school choice effort or the teacher pay effort. Many of you haven't heard that one, I'm assuming. So we're being consistent in keeping those subjects separate, and our efforts to lift up public schools and public school teachers, especially with my Teacher Bill of Rights that last session the House killed, but other states modeled it all across the country, and it was graded as a bipartisan bill by many organizations. But I guess for some reason, it wasn't a priority. It will be this time around for us. If applications don't exceed available revenue, all are admitted. If applications are beyond available revenue and beyond 100,000 in number, then we will go immediately to a priority set. And that priority set is weighted for 80% of the funds in the school choice ESA Education Freedom Program to be allocated to special needs, students with disabilities, and a certain threshold within the poverty level itself, so that the most vulnerable Texans will have these opportunities way before anyone else. And with such a gigantic percentage of priority within the whole program, that it will be very clear where the Texas legislature stands on who we're really working the hardest to help here and serve here among the most vulnerable Texans. The students accepted into the ESA program will initially receive a minimum of $2,000. So think of our homeschool eligibility, right? And that would be for a homeschool family capped at that point at this time. We're listening to the homeschool families that will be coming up today, and they will be, as well as statewide organizations, and we will be listening to their preferences about that policy. But that number is 100% higher than the number that was passed in the last iteration of this bill. It was $1,000 at that time, and it was fully supported by the statewide homeschool organization groups, mainly talking about the fact that they don't as much have tuition costs, but they have curriculum and tutoring costs. I talk with my hands, I'm going to hit this mic again. So curriculum and tutoring, sometimes transportation to tutoring, those would be examples of the limits of what that ESA might provide. Beyond that, If families choose to enroll their student in an accredited private school, they would receive $10,000 for the education savings account. And if that student has a disability, that student would receive, and this is coming from a public school, they would receive $11,500 if that child has a disability designation. Parents can spend these funds on an example of a different set of menu items. And again, this money doesn't go to the parents like a voucher. So you can't go to Rooms to Go and buy furniture if you have $1,000 left over, right? This is an education savings account with the strongest anti-fraud provisions in the country. The money would be directed from the framework at the comptroller's office, right? The comptroller is our money man for the state of Texas, not through TEA. And then that money would be directed to the providers that were already approved. And then whether it be a homeschool family choosing their own curriculum and then customizing that curriculum afterwards, that'd be fine. Or if it would be a private school effort for a student going from public to private, and if there's a delta or a difference or a gap on the tuition for that private school, it's still a $10,000 number for most of these ESAs. And through private philanthropy or scholarships within that school or the community, they would need to find a way to fill that difference, as is the case today. Parents can spend these funds again on tuition, instructional materials, higher education courses, trade certificates, assessment costs, different therapies, tutoring, and transportation as examples. Just as in SB1 that we passed prior in the special, the participants are required to take a norm reference test annually. Most private schools offer that already. There is no imposition of the STAR test on private schools. There are no strings passed along to homeschool families or private schools through this testing effort. So you look at many private schools offer the Iowa test today. Public schools offer norm reference tests to seniors in high school. They're called the SAT and the ACT. So these norm reference tests are in public and private and in the homeschool world. That's the legislation as it calls out for those tests to be administered for those that hold the ESA. Previously, we had a hold harmless provision for small public schools in the bill. We passed that a couple of times. Members weren't really fired up about that provision. The bill still passed with it in it. The public school stakeholders all around the state, including in our public hearings, rejected those provisions and said, among many other things, we don't care about that. And the House, through those signals, rejected that policy several times over. So we pulled that provision out of the bill. There's not another school choice plan in the country that offers a hold harmless provision. So in other words, if a child or a student leaves a public school with an ESA to go to the private school, the public school would receive money for that child either way. That provision was rejected last time around by many public school and teacher organizations and stakeholders, so it's gone. Senate Bill 2 removes that provision and keeps the program straightforward and focused on empowering families. It's our first of many bills, again, to unleash this session to bolster the potential of Texas education and to bolster the potential of our students and our schools. And that includes our public schools as well. Many of you watched the Finance Committee meetings yesterday, looking at the commitment of over $96 billion for public education, funding current formulas, enrollment growth, and an additional nearly $5 billion for public education as new money. That there are 3, 4, 5 states in America, maybe more, that don't even have a total state budget of the new money that we are allocating towards public schools. Not old money, new money. We did that last session as well, though, and that was also rejected by superintendent organizations, teacher organizations, and many public school stakeholders. That testimony was that it was okay to kill all that new money for teachers and public schools if they had an opportunity to get rid of 40,000 education savings accounts for special needs kids. That's very confusing testimony for us as we listen and we try to work out solutions for the future of the state. And yes, that's true. By investing in our teachers and our parents, we give future generations the greatest chance at keeping this Texas economic engine alive, which after the 08 and 09 subprime crash saved America. This economic engine. But if we don't make changes fast, and it might not be in your school district, and we all love our school districts. I don't hear anyone say anything different. The narratives you get through some of your emails definitely says something different. But we show that through our actions, and the political process is brutal. 31 million Texans, y'all have fortitude, backbone, experience, a never quit attitude, and an absolute strong opinion. I'm proud of you for that. I'm proud of us for that. But in this building, it's tough sometimes to land the plane. And we're determined that our Texas students deserve it this time around. Thank you for your consideration, members. I know that was an extended layout, but I wanted to cover some of the problems that have been buzzing around through narratives that don't have anything to do with the actual policy of the bill. And it's important with our media watching that we have those types of clarifications covered. You know, and I'll finish with this and open up to questions. It's fascinating to me that last year, in 2023, not last year, we had a public hearing on school choice, and we had almost every public school stakeholder in the state of Texas in overflow rooms waiting to testify against. And that's okay. It's everyone's right to testify as they see fit in their heart. In Washington, D.C., you can no longer, as a private citizen, testify on a bill unless you're invited. That is tragic. So we make sure everyone has their say, but we've got to keep decorum and make sure we're respectful and keep your cool if you don't hear what you like, right? Don't even think of us in that situation. Think of everyone else waiting to testify next. We have to give everybody the same amount of time. But with that testimony that we had last session, it was very clear that with all of these different opinions, we have incredible misunderstandings within the bill that I think some of you might have questions about today. And so I'm going to open up the commentary among our senators to help exactly with that, to make sure the audience and those watching in the media can cover it. When we had those hearings last in 2023 on the ESA, all those education groups and the media showed up. A few months later, when we had a hearing on public school student outcomes, how are our students doing? What can we do to do better for public school students? Not one. I don't mean to say only three. Not one camera, not one public school superintendent organization, not one teacher organization showed up at the hearing. Not one. When we have a hearing on student outcomes soon, please come. That's important. Okay, members, Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Senator Creighton, for a good layout on SB2. Members, at this time, do you have any questions? Senator Menendez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir Creighton, thank you for your comprehensive layout. On page 2 of your bill, where it says low-income household,
Yes.
I think I have not seen it in any other agency where it's defined as 500% of the federal poverty line. Is that, I was just curious, how did you choose the low-income household to be 500% of poverty?
Yeah, last session we had two different metrics in our same iterations that we passed. We had a 350% and we had a 500% in the framework. The 500% is essentially a teacher and a fireman with a few kids in their household. Okay, so we have these rigid definitions and formulas that refer to poverty levels and refer to income levels and on, and we really don't have a lot of flexibility outside of those references. So because it's a uniform type of reference, that's the number we ended up at, to make sure that if a teacher and a fireman that are working hard every day to just make life make sense, and they have 3 or 4 kids, that they would be eligible within the framework and prioritized first,
So,
along with disability.
so you have, I think, $200 million in the bill set aside for universal for anybody who applies, right?
That's right.
So 200 million, and I think, is the bill saying that the ESA amount currently is going to be about $10,000? Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. And within that 200 million fully universal population,
Right.
the other 80% of disability and within a certain range of the poverty level, they're also eligible within that same
200
lottery.
million, right. That's where I guess my confusion comes, because that's about 20,000 children, if I do the math correct. So then what I don't understand is if the lottery priority is supposed to be for low income household, and you set it at as high as 500%, but there is no other program, like free lunch benefits are at about 130% of poverty. And so it almost seems like it doesn't really have a priority because the amount of the 500% of poverty guideline is so high. And I'm just wondering if you might be willing to amend the bill so that it really would be a set aside for people who are really the poorest. Because one of the concerns that I have is the $10,000, I'm not sure that will cover, in many schools it'll cover possibly tuition, but it may not cover uniforms, transportation, lunch, books. In some schools they have to buy books. And so if the parents can have this 10,000, but they can't afford to make up the difference, then are they really eligible? What are they really eligible? It's just like almost like a bridge that's 3/4 of the way built. It's not really good enough for them.
It's a great point. We have some incredible testimony today that will come forward to talk about the private philanthropy through organizations that already exist in Texas, among others. And they're going to present some staggering numbers that will, in a very positive way, shore some of the gaps and concerns that you might have on, is $10,000 enough for tuition? Last session, we were at $8,000. And we have some very good data showing that in the upper 7,000, low 8,000 range, that would cover much of the tuition for a large majority of the private schools in Texas. Well, just as we're addressing with public schools, costs go up, right? So we made adjustments there on those numbers, and we added an additional bump for students that have a disability.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that your plan is that we will also be investing in public education moving forward. My question would be, are we looking to make it the same level of investment? Because if the program that you're proposing today is successful with as many educational opportunities as possible, the fiscal note on the program shows that this would triple in size in 2 sessions by 2029. Unfortunately, public education has not received any significant increase in their funding mechanisms in the last 6 years, aside from the 30-cent raise that we did to the school safety allotment and the $15,000 per campus. So my concern is that we're setting aside $1 billion for this new education savings voucher, but I haven't seen the same level of investment in our public schools. And I just think it concerns me that we're creating a tilting of the playing field in terms of our public schools.
Yeah, we put $39 billion new dollars into public education in the last 10 years, Senator Menendez. I don't know that the trajectory you're talking about, and we have LBB here, they can comment. There's no escalation in the legislation. There's no escalation. So if they're extrapolating, if the Legislative Budget Board, for those watching, they do a lot of number crunching for us up here and give us good advice. The escalation of the growth of the program and the bill, that is fun to see how they would extrapolate the numbers, but we as a body would have to approve the growth of the program as appropriators and on the Senate floor before those fairy tale projections beyond the $1 billion plan that we're talking about now would be anything but a cartoon.
Thank you for answering my questions. Thank you, Madam.
Very welcome.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Senator Paxton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Creighton, for this great bill. I've been looking at it very closely, and I have a lot of folks in my orbit that are very interested in it for a lot of different reasons: public school, private school, homeschool, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness that's gone into this.
Thank you.
From what we started with, how far has this bill come? From what we started with when we first began considering this legislation?
Well, it depends on what we mean by beginning this path. Senator Betancourt, for years, carried an incredible tax credit opportunity that many states offer today. Florida, as an example, has a very successful program there. And we've had different iterations of small school choice efforts over the past, I would say, 4 sessions for sure. Maybe since back to 2015, but how far have we come just working through 2022, the long year of 2023, the 24 interim, and where we are today? I think that we've been very diligent from sitting in public school classrooms with teachers all over the state to talking to the brightest minds that crunch the numbers, to talking to families, moms and dads that are just talking day to day about their specific needs for their kids, and they're seeing what all these other states are doing with all of this success, and they're struggling. And we've got so many incredible workforce projections and education gaps at the same time on the progress that our students are making, or the lack of progress that they're showing, especially through the COVID years. But I think really COVID just shined a bright light on the fact that even up to 2022, less than half of the 8th graders in Texas were performing at grade level in our Texas public schools, and many of them were 2 grades behind. So we've tried to, in tandem, bring incredibly bold public school reforms and support, teacher support, and changes to make their lives better. And on this school choice front, I think we'll have the best plan and the boldest launch in America.
Is the ESA bill tied to you addressed this a little bit, but I'd just like you to make a really clear statement on this. Is the ESA bill tied to teacher pay raises or funding for public schools?
No, it's not. Again, for 90% of the regular session, the media did not report on this, but for 90% of the regular session, the Senate kept school funding for public schools separate, teacher pay and teacher rights and safety separate, and the education freedom and school choice effort separate. In mid-May, after we had started in January, the House kept signaling to kill those bills separate, so we took the hint. And we took a House Bill 100, that had a broad education caption. That was all that was left. And we poured all the subjects in together and sent it back on that signal, and they killed that bill. So we were working off different signals. We were doing the best that we could, but our priority set was to keep these subjects separate.
Thank you. In the section 29.358, which is the section that describes the requirements for pre-approval for different types of education service providers.
Yes.
Public schools are also listed as a potential provider. Does that mean that a student would be able to use their ESA to take a class, say, a la carte from a public school?
No, the student, if they were relying on a public school campus, they couldn't be part of what would qualify them for average daily attendance. If that school has a chemistry lab and the school is open with a mindset that all kids should learn and our available assets and resources should be available to them if our current public school kids aren't using them, then those opportunities would very much be available on a public school campus, and that's what that means.
Okay. In that same section, charter schools aren't specifically named there, but since charter schools are also public schools, would that also be true for charter school students?
That'd certainly be my intent.
Thank you. I've also heard examples of micro schools, co-ops, learning pods, and other innovative models of families coming together to educate their children. Could a family use their ESA to help pay for this while staying in compliance with the requirements of the bill?
They could, but if the micro school is not yet accredited, they would only be eligible for the first tier of the $2,000 that would be available in the ESA. If they're, as a lottery pick submittal, if they were chosen, that's the level that they would come in at, just as picture a homeschool family that gains eligibility through the ESA framework and they're awarded $2,000, they're also not accredited, right? So in that unaccredited category, 2,000 would be the maximum, and it'd be very, very regimented and approved on what that could be spent on. It wouldn't tell them, what curriculum to purchase, but it would make sure that safety is a factor and that legitimate companies are a factor. And, I'm trying to think, for instance, that a tutor would have to pass a criminal background check to be able to participate in the program. Hope that answers your question.
That does. That's good. So a micro school could be kind of it could either be treated as a homeschool or a private school, depending on what the micro school chose to do.
Yes, a micro school or a homeschool pod, any unaccredited related, they've still got to be registered with TEA, and it's still got to be or registered with the framework itself. Depends on what the comptroller rules and how they put that together, but it would not be at the higher category of the dollars in the ESA. It would be at the lower.
And I think maybe sort of associated with that, could you speak to the purpose of Section 29.368, which regards program participant, provider, and vendor autonomy? And specifically, what I'm going at is, just to clarify, this bill would not allow for government interference in religious beliefs, would it?
No, we had an email flying around yesterday creating a lot of doubt on that. That provision that's mentioned in that particular part of the bill, it's called a compelling government interest provision. The Supreme Court has held it could only be invoked if a serious question about health and safety was at issue. Again, I mentioned that if it was somehow discovered that a tutor was on a violent sexual predator list and it wasn't caught, some sort of immediate action that had to be taken. But that provision already exists in our Civil Practices and Remedies Code. So this is just a restatement of what is already in law.
Well, I appreciate that, because I know that religious belief is at the center of why many families choose to homeschool or private school, and it's important to our public school families as well. So I just wanted to get some clarification on that, because I'd seen some of the same rhetoric going around.
Thanks for asking on that. The act that it's actually found in the Civil Practices and Remedies Code is also known as the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act. So that's actually where that provision was found before this legislation. We'll have the Catholic Conference of Bishops up and the Texas Private School Association, the Texas Homeschool Association later, and again, neither of them either object to keeping it in the bill or removing it because it already exists in law.
I've got one final question. Since this is a universal ESA, could you speak to the purpose of the language regarding 80% of recipients being former public school students who are either low income or have a disability, specifically on the fact that they were existing public school students, and attached to that, would pre-K students and kindergartners be able to receive an ESA under the lottery in this bill?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked to many members door to door and visiting with you in your districts and just working through this process for years. Obviously, on all of our hearts and minds is the largest number of students in Texas today are in our public school system, right? I mean, the average of 74 school choice plans in America today across 32 states represents less than 2.7% per program of their public school students that left for an ESA. Our program is 1.7% on a launch. This program is still 10 times what Florida launched with 25 years ago. And I believe it's 100x factor or more on what Arizona began with. But for 20 plus years, those two states respectively, they started out with a focus of public school students needing an option that might involve a private school opportunity.
And how does that affect pre-K or kindergarten students?
Pre-K is included.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your attention to those things, and again, your careful attention in crafting the bill, and look forward to working with you.
Oh, thank you for your excellent question, Senator Paxton.
Thank you, Senator Paxton. Senator Middleton.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Chairman Creighton, thank you for all your hard work on this bill. You mentioned how the bill is universal, which is important, of course, to a lot of our parents in our districts and community. And I was wondering if you could kind of expound a little more on how SB2 is a universal education savings account bill.
Yes, so thank you for that, Senator Middleton. For $200 million in SB2 is committed to a fully universal population based on eligibility. So that would be public school, private school, homeschool, right? And so many states around the country have different versions of school choice. They have tax credits, they have vouchers, they have ESAs, they have other programs. But we specifically are working on an education savings account to be created. And so that fully universal population would be served within those dollars. And again, if that was just in and of itself, the launch, it would be maybe the largest launch in the history of the country for any state on a school choice effort. But we also have $800 other billion to serve the most vulnerable kids.
And it's all families are eligible. And
yes.
And on the funding mechanism, it's as you sign up, essentially. I mean, I don't recall that we have ever in any program put 100% of the funding as if 100% of all citizens of the state will sign up on day one. I don't think that's ever happened in how we appropriate or administer any state program, right?
Yes, I mean, it's unfortunate that Texas is not leading on school choice, right? We're number 30. We would be number 33, right? We don't want to lead we don't want to follow any other state in the country. But if we are following, we want to launch the best program that we can available, and this will certainly be it. So you're exactly right on your remarks.
And it's a big number. It's double last session, and I think this is another important point that we considered is there are a lot of states that have school choice programs, and we can see the exit rates.
Yeah.
And that's typically 1 or 2% a year. So the number that we've got for this appropriation is about that, right? So
yes, we'll have testimony today where we will have requests to include all 6 million students in Texas immediately for a $10,000 education savings account. That would be a $53 billion number just for this year, not to mention the impossibility that it would take to even set up an operations framework that would support that. Look, in Texas, to lead on school choice and to have the best program available, we have to launch an initial framework and then show success. and we're going to. And I think the rest of the nation, as it's seen its own success, we will see with this framework that we've at least had the opportunity to take what others have done a pretty good job with, and we've improved upon that. And our kids will benefit from it, and our workforce.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Good work.
Thank you, Senator Middleton. Senator Bittencourt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Creighton, first off, you've mentioned repeatedly the 32 states that have already implemented some version of school choice. I'm assuming we'll hear today a substantial number of data points, studies, et cetera, about the success of those. And you used to quote some interesting numbers about how the success percentage of those studies was quite high. True?
That's true.
All right. And because, again, what gets measured gets fixed here, we're putting in a specific allotment of money that we believe will handle about 100,000 students. And you make a point about starting a program even as robustly as this one starts. 100,000 students is an awfully large number, because I believe there's only about 70 some odd thousand current openings in private school, capacity. Is that true?
That's what we'll have testimony on today. I believe you're right.
Right. So when you size a program like this, you want to size it for success, because there's also stratified channels to market. There's private schools. We'll be hearing from parochial schools. We'll be hearing from school choice. There's a whole variety of not just charter schools in the public sense or the public school system itself. And when you look at what's happened in the past, especially the fact that there's been decades of usage of these programs, whether it's an educational savings account or tax credit scholarship, there's been problems with fraud in these other states, has there not?
There's been problems with fraud, and there's been issues with implementation on trying to serve too many students at once without a framework supported by funding. And we're going to be best in class on both of those.
So we've learned from that. You mentioned that some of your bills have already been model ALEC bills, but I want to ask a couple specific questions. You've got provision in here that parents agree to use pre-approved educational service providers or vendors of educational products determined by the comptroller. Now, why is it important for providers or vendors to be pre-approved?
Well, we need to, certainly with the use of tax money, right, we have to make sure that, we don't push any strings or undue burdens or requirements on private schools or homeschool families. But at the same time, we need to make sure that tax money is being used for a school that's actually a school, right?
Right.
So a private school that's submitted as a choice for the use of the ESA, and the submittal says they're an accredited private school, but they're actually not a school at all, there would need to be some sort of a watch on whether or not that submittal was accurate to protect the tax money. Second to that, for instance, homeschool families can choose their own curriculum and they can customize it like all homeschool families do today. But we need to make sure that if it's Amazon or if it's Barnes & Noble or if it's a certain online effort or an entity that's being ordered through, that they're legitimate and not taking advantage of the family or the taxpayer in an unscrupulous way. There's been some fraud on that in other states.
Right, and sometimes substantial, quite frankly. So it's important that the Texas plan starts off on the right foot on this. There is simply no provision in the bill or any legislative intent or any fact or supposition of fact that this bill would restrict a private school or vendor's curriculum, would it?
No.
And the fact that that we're upfront addressing fraud and is really just a recognition of the obvious of what's happened in the other states. So we're attempting to bring best practices to this plan because this is $1 billion, and we do along with Senator Mendez, we'll have some questions on that fiscal note, because as far as I can tell, $1 billion a year times, 2 is $2 billion. And so I'm sure we'll have some questions about the fiscal note as an inflated number. But it's important that a lot of thought has gone into making sure that this, because it's not a voucher, because it's a savings account, that the destination of that money not be end up in fraudulent hands.
Yeah, and some that hold the ESA, they may think it's intrusive that there's a requirement, for instance, for pre-approval for a tutor to simply not be on a sexual predator watch list. Okay, they may just think that's incredibly irresponsible to make sure that doesn't happen or that child's protected. We have to have certain parameters in this bill for criminal background checks and pre-approval of vendors and providers that are used. We don't find another program in the country that leaves those behind and just leaves it to the will of outcomes, right? So in those aspects, and with your question, Senator Betancourt, we've been very thorough, but we're not encroaching or passing strings on to homeschool or private school families.
Well, this is part of the questioning, Madam Chairman, I am going to make with the witnesses later to ask them if these safeguards are enough. And I want to point out that once again, this committee led quite substantially on stopping what was referred to by a senior member of this committee as passing the trash long ago to stop basically inappropriate student-teacher relationships, and we built on that every session with databases and involving, at the request of private schools, access to it. So once again, these are all lessons learned that are trying to be rolled into this major piece of legislation at one time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Betancourt. And the work that Chairman Creighton has done on this is very thorough, and he's really checked every box. So we appreciate the thoroughness you've done. Thanks. Senator Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chairman Creighton, thank you for your leadership and working so hard on this very important piece of legislation. Just a couple of comments, and we've covered some of it. But look, I know that you, like myself, and those of us here on the panel, are passionate about the importance of protecting public education in Texas and are proud of our public schools. We've got so many exceptional ones across all 254 counties. And I know that you've spoken today already about the fact that the funding for this ESA program in SB2 is separate from the funding needs of public education. And I know you've also commented about the appropriation process, that we as a body recognize the horrible inflationary effects of the last administration's spending and its impact on everybody, be it school districts, businesses, families, all of that, and that we're addressing those issues obviously here in the course of the session. And so I guess specifically, I think the fact that we have a unique element here with this ESA where we're addressing this issue pertaining to hold harmless, maybe just elaborate on that for another moment or two, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. So yes, in prior iterations of the bill, specifically with signals from the House's concerns, West Texas concerns about very small school districts that could not scale a particular loss of a student or two or 4 or 5, however many that might be the case, we had a hold harmless provision in the bill where for the first couple of years they would still receive money for that student, whether or not the student left the school for the use of an ESA. That provision, even though supported by the Senate, even though there's not another plan in America that offers it, that would provide public schools with money, even though the child's not even in the school, was rejected by public schools. So knowing that, we can't continue to tell our taxpayers that we're imposing provisions onto legislation that are rejected by the very stakeholders that we were trying to lift up. And after a couple of different rounds on the Senate floor and a lot of encouragement by myself and many of our colleagues, they continue to say no thanks.
And Mr. Chairman, switching topics from public education for a moment, talk about homeschoolers. I know we've gotten some feedback from homeschool families that are concerned in their initial read. Can you just maybe give your thoughts on that to reassure the homeschool families out there about the bill and what the intent is structurally and the implications for them and their families?
Absolutely. I mean, we have specific provisions in the bill to protect the integrity of what homeschool families covet the most now, which is that there will not be any strings or imposition of the heavy hand of government on directing their curriculum or any of those types of concerns. There won't be a star test imposed on, homeschool families or some way, shape, or form uprooting what is a very successful Texas model for them. And we'll have soon the Texas Homeschool Coalition statewide organization coming to testify for the bill, as they've worked very closely to protect their homeschool families in helping us craft this legislation.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Parker. Senator King.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Chairman Creighton, this is really a question in response to a lot of emails I got and questions after we finally adjourned for the last time and year before last. And the question is, have you considered restricting the ESA program to U.S. citizens or lawful residents?
Yes. Absolutely have. We've worked all through the interim on this subject. There is one state in America that has a requirement for an ESA holder to be lawfully present. And we have talked to counsel with Ed Choice, who is in close communication with that Senate author in Alabama and Alabama's Attorney General, that have great concern that that entire school choice program is at risk through litigation by including that provision in the bill. Now, that bill could be separate from this bill, but I think what we intend to provide is there's a Supreme Court case, Plyler v. Doe, that very clearly states that public education dollars for education purposes cannot be withheld specifically for citizenship reasons, and that's the highest court in the land that's decided that. So I think what we plan to do on the Senate floor, that case is Plyler v. Doe, is we plan to put a trigger amendment in this bill to where if General Paxton or the Attorney General brings a case that for some way, shape, or form, we've seen the Supreme Court overturn a lot of historical decisions that they then determined to be based on bad legal precedent and reasoning. And if that case were to be overturned, then that provision in this legislation would trigger and that it would be active. Look, in 74 school choice programs across America, we've done the deepest dive, forensic dive that you could possibly do. We don't see undocumented families waving their hands up in the air saying, please let us fill out all of this paperwork and notice us and let us apply for an education savings account for a private school or homeschool opportunity. We just don't see the evidence of that, but we still want to be resolute in knowing that, first and foremost, this would be a Texas first agenda for very finite resources and scarcity of dollars. And that would be, as we approach the floor, our intent to include that language by amendment.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Hinojosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great work on this bill. I just have some questions regarding some of the data that may be associated with some of this. As you've noted, we've modeled this off of successful programs in other states, and we've hopefully taken and learned a lot from what did not work in other states, and we're hoping to do it better. Do you happen to have data on the percentage of children or families that actually utilize an ESA as it's been introduced in other states? that would actually take advantage of this program?
I mentioned something earlier, and I'm not sure that it answers your question, Senator Hinojosa, but first of all, I'm very glad you and Brent both are on this committee. You're going to really enjoy the purpose behind what we cover. From 74 school choice programs currently across America, 32 states, there is an average of, I know, what says 2.74% of public school students in those states, respectively, are using an ESA if they have such a program. So that's not exactly the percentage of what you were asking, but you may be able to extrapolate from it.
Actually, I've heard something kind of similar. I just wanted to kind of reiterate that.
We're below that. We're at 1.7% with our launch. And again, Arizona launched with 300 students, and Florida launched with 17,000 students. And they're, 25 and 28 years ahead of us, respectively. Bad news is we're following. Good news is we can learn from their mistakes and build. I've relied on 162 empirical national studies for the success and the scrutiny of school choice programs across the state, across America, and only about 5 of them have a net negative. There's about 10 of those programs that have a net neutral because they're new. And the rest of them, in the 140 plus range, I'm a lawyer, so I can't add, were absolutely just astonishingly net positive. So I'm excited about being on the next round from Texas.
No, thank you. And I've heard similar. I guess my point being that we've had a percentage of people utilizing the program. And in those states, public school has not fallen apart. It's actually been a supplement to the children in those states.
Yes.
I have some rural communities in my district as well, and so speaking to them also about that and trying to alleviate those fears that they may have regarding that. It's important to know some of that statistical information. But
there's been no exodus from public schools that have threatened the sticks and bricks of public schools across the country. Those are manufactured narratives, and saying that school choice opportunities that are reasonable and lifting up a public school system and public school teachers in harmony, doing all of that on behalf of our students, instead of talking about elections and power and institutions and control, instead of talking about all that, just talking about the kids.
Absolutely.
It's been incredibly successful.
Well, and that's the point I was hoping you would elaborate on. That's exactly what I believe as well. And to those children and those families who decided to take advantage of those ESA programs, is there data out there on how successful those outcomes have been for those students?
There is, and that's part of those empirical studies that I'm referencing. I can get you copies of that. Senator West and I worked together on the Senate floor last time we were in debate to add to the legislation some demographic information also that's going to be reported. It's not tied to individual identities, but it's in group, right? To just understand who's using and relying on and succeeding from the ESAs in all kinds of categories. And that helps us to understand from a metric standpoint, where do we need to make adjustments? If we grow the program, how can we show the public success, and any fear related to it is just not founded.
Thank you so much. I completely agree, and I think that is something to the point that I think a lot of us realize up here is that it's offering. I don't think anybody really has questioned, the educational value of a student taking advantage of an ESA. They're more worried and concerned about what would happen to the public school institution as a result of it. It's not, the child is going to get a bad education by utilizing an ESA. But I think we, rightfully so, should be concentrating on the education of our students.
That's exactly right. We have tremendous funding initiatives with the border and Medicaid and with heavy infrastructure and water and the grid and so many different things that we have to address. This money, like those monies, are coming from our surplus, and we're using surplus dollars for public school new dollars as well. But our kids are worth it. You name all those other issues, and what's our greatest natural resource in this state? It is our kids, and what kind of education we can give them, what kind of future we can give them, and all of us are aligned on that. It's just about the details. And can we agree on building something that we all believe will work? And I have the utmost respect for my colleagues that have concerns. And iron sharpens iron. We have to continue to ask the tough questions and vet this program, and it will be, I believe, the best in the country.
Thank you for speaking to that, especially for some of my rural concerns. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hinojosa. Senator West.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I've listened attentively to conversations here, and I've been involved in most of these conversations over the course of the years. The die has been cast. The fact is, it's going to pass. The question is how do you make it a better bill? Several questions. The comptroller is going to be responsible for screening the ESOs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and so rules will have to be promulgated by the comptroller to determine exactly what the qualifications of these ESOs are.
Yes, those education assistance organizations for the audience are the support providers that would help prop up the program, help it, be strong enough and stable enough as an infrastructure itself to serve families.
Okay, one of the concerns that I have over the course of these last few years here in the state of Texas, we've had a bunch of data breaches, correct? As an example, in the comptroller's office,
Yes.
I think it was in 2011, there was a significant data breach at the comptroller's office, resulting in about 3.5 million Texans having their Social Security numbers stolen by hackers. Cost the state approximately $2 million. As we look at this issue, several other agencies, Health and Human Services, 61,000 people. Texas Medical had about 1.4 million people. What are we doing to make certain that the infrastructure, let me back up, persons getting involved in this particular program will have to turn over pretty much sensitive information in order to be considered correct to be a part of the lottery.
That's right.
Tax returns, I don't know what else, but a bunch of sensitive information. What are we doing to make certain in this bill that there is sensitivity to the issue and it's going to be addressed?
Yeah, a great question, Senator West. We've been very consistent with the providers, vendors, and any outside organizations and the sort of the a la carte menu on the services provided to make sure we have the strongest anti-fraud provisions in the country. But separate from that, to your question, we've added some cybersecurity provisions as perfecting amendments to the bill to address data breaches and protections for our individual identities and those participants.
And what have you added to the bill as an example? Not a whole list, but as an example.
It's on page 4 of the legislation, and just as a summary, the comptroller would establish cybersecurity requirements for those exact education assistance organizations that you mentioned, so that best practices developed under certain sections of the government code would protect the individuals relying on the program. That was a new provision in the bill.
Okay. As it relates to, I'm going to go back to Senator Menendez.
Senator West, may I interrupt 1 minute? Just for those who wish to testify, give public testimony, you must register at the kiosk in the back. We're going to close registration at 2:30, so you have about 9 minutes. So if there's anybody within the sound of my voice that's here and wishes to offer public testimony, please register at the kiosk before we close at 2:30. Thank you. Thank you, Senator West.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You know, in previous iterations of this particular bill, vouchers, education service accounts, we talked about making certain we prioritize certain populations, those that were in impoverished situations, and those that were in academically failing schools. Why does this bill make no consideration of those factors?
And tell me again the specific factors you're mentioning.
Well, being in failing schools and in impoverished conditions. As an example, you define low income as $500,000, 500% above the federal poverty guidelines for a family of four, as an example.
Right.
That ends up being roughly $156,000. Okay.
Yes.
And then the average income, a median income in the state of Texas for a family of four is about $76,000. Okay, and so this does not prioritize, at least I don't see it, this does not prioritize the lowest income in our state, or those, I don't see anything in there about prioritizing kids coming from academically failing schools.
Yeah, those provisions, Senator West, are up to that threshold. So it would be any amount up to those percentages. And we talked a lot about, and we considered in prior versions of the bill, exactly how to establish the metrics. But at the end of the day, hearing from so many of our moms and dads, it wasn't just DNF failing schools that we were talking about with our parents and our guardians. It was bullying, and it was the heavy influx of one time you try and you die fentanyl. It was certain aspects of just the learning environment itself in schools all across the state. There's 8,161 schools in Texas. There's 1,200 school districts, and parents had different reasons for hardship and what their students needed. And I believe if we listed all of those hardships, we may not be able to print that much. There's a lot of concerns. So we ended up going to a threshold up to that amount.
So all hardships are equal, that's what you're saying?
We try to make sure we respect everyone's challenges as they approach us, yes, with great respect.
And so you're putting bullying on the same, I guess you could say equal platform as low-income schools? Someone coming from low academically.
Well, I personally know families who've lost a child to suicide because of bullying, and so I could.
You're the author of the bill. I understand.
We could visit about the priority set, but looking into a mother's eyes on her hardship, you and I both. I'm not going to tell her one problem is more important than another.
You're the author of the bill. And hopefully we can discuss that.
Yeah.
It would seem as though that up to leaves a great deal of flexibility, and we could put something in this bill that, with all of this talent that we have around us in terms of staff,
right,
something that considers those factors, prioritize those factors in consideration of the individuals up to that particular.
It's great points that you make.
So let's make certain that we look at that. As it relates to the administration of the program, I understand that we're going to be having reports, and that's fine. And those reports will be annual reports going from the EOSs to the comptroller.
That's right.
Correct? Okay, and then the comptroller will turn around and provide a report to the legislature.
Yes.
Correct?
That's right.
One thing that concerns me is that the ESOs will be audited each year. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. And if any violation of the statutes are discovered, the comptroller should be notified. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. However, this section in the bill doesn't require that the results of the audits be made public, but generally reported. It's only generally reported to the comptroller. Why?
Well, I think that as we have oversight over all state agencies, and our families and these providers are going to be given input into, the managing entity of the framework itself, it's going to be our responsibility to get the information that's provided and make decisions.
Well, I understand it, but what I'm saying is that if you if you have an ESO that audits ABC private school that has kids in it, do we get, as legislators, an opportunity to view the audit itself?
Well, I was trying to say that in my last response, but yes, our oversight over the comptroller would be that we get to see the results of the data.
No, then we're not on the same wavelength. I'm saying the audit itself. I mean, do we get the opportunity to actually look not only at the results but the audit that was conducted of ABC School?
We'll be able to see every aspect of the framework the comptroller develops through rulemaking.
Well, as you well know, if we give specific parameters, then that would be considered. But if we don't give it, it won't be considered. And my question is whether or not we want to be able to see the audit, which should be subject to open records. Audits being done should be subject to open records.
As long as the privacy of those families and those individual
Sure.
students is protected, and I'm we need to make sure that that's very clear.
Okay, so we're on the same.
You just asked a question about the importance of preventing a data breach, and then you just asked a question about the importance of seeing the intricate details of what comes with these
That's
students.
the very reason why we're stopping right, so you can understand what I just asked you.
Yeah, that's right.
I didn't ask you to see the intricate details
Of the audit.
I just said, can we see the audit, not the individuals that were students,
Right.
but the audit
The
itself.
audit results. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So being able to do that, the intersection. You know what my concern in part this is. Vouchers, when we look at it historically, started, I think, and maybe some of the witnesses may have testified this, started right after the end of the Civil War. Okay, and Texas obviously participated in it, gave monies, state dollars to persons that didn't want to be in school with black people, and they put them into religious schools. And I know we've come a long way from that. Because this particular program that's being set up is not based on the color. But when you look at the empirical studies, what you see is this, a couple of things. And correct me if I'm wrong, because you've done a deep dive into this. When you look across the country at these programs, what I've seen is that, like Arizona as an example, over 60% of the students that take advantage of this program is already individuals that were already in the program in the first place. So frankly, we're subsidizing students that were already involved in the program. Am I correct about that?
I've seen,
And it's not on Arizona, but other states.
I've seen some different data on Arizona, but their weights are different than our priorities. Our 80% weighted framework for the use of the funds is going from public school to private school.
Okay, and when we say public school, does that also include charter schools?
Yes.
So if a student was involved in charter school, that's a prerequisite to be involved in this particular program.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Public school.
Yeah, for the 80%, not the 20% full universal. So
The universal. All right, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yes.
So if you're in the 20%, then you don't have to have been involved. It would not. A prerequisite is not being at a public school. You can just be involved in it.
It would be both. It would be all included in that 20% population for fully universal, and by lottery pick, it could be a significant number of those students in that hypothetical you mentioned. It just depends.
Let me make sure I understand your response. If you're in the 20%, if you're trying to get in 20%, and there's spillover, there's no prerequisite that you've had attended a public school. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Okay. So you can just go into the program. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to get in the 80%, you would have had to attend a public school.
That's right.
And why the differential between the two?
And those submitting applications that would be qualified within that 80% are also qualified to be considered in the 20%. They're qualified for both. But separate from that, there's an additional expansion on that eligible population that doesn't tie a requirement to public school first. It could be already in private, as you mentioned.
And if you're already in private, you can get in the 20%. Okay, I got you.
Gotcha.
All
Because some of those families barely making it by. They might have made that jump 2 years ago or what have you, and they're doing the best they can to survive. But we're creating a framework that's universal in eligibility for those reasons. But we've got weights to make sure the large percentage of the dollars used will help from public to private opportunities through that ESA.
When you say weights, that's what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. I hope that you would consider prioritizing different students in the 80 percentile based on circumstances.
I thought that's what you were probably asking me, and I will continue to work with you on any suggestions.
I look forward to that also. But again, looking at the data,
Yes.
Arizona, Indiana, Florida, states like that, most of the kids that are being subsidized by taxpayer dollars were already in private schools. Do you agree or disagree?
I mean, there's been 28 years of Arizona students served, and that program has grown from 300 students from that time to now. There's been so many different data points and iterations. We could snapshot on, you say it's 60% today. I think there's been ebbs and flows and ups and downs and evolutions in all of those types of students served for a third of a century in that state.
So the answer to the question is what?
That was the answer to the question. I believe.
Okay,
I believe if you take a particular snapshot of it as of last year, that might be the data point, but it absolutely might not be accurate for 28 years of review of the program.
Well, based on what I understand, it is, to be honest with you.
Is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Let's
I stand to be corrected.
let's share in that. I'd love to look at it, and
Not only in Arizona, but other states also.
but again, we have 80% weights for the origin to be public school in the use of the ESA on to another opportunity. In Arizona, they don't have those weights. They don't have that priority set. So it's very interesting to look at what other states are doing, but hopefully we've built something that will serve who needs help the most, have the best launch that we could possibly have among the states, and show great success in how public schools thrive and ESA holders also thrive.
Well, I recognize we have a lot of people that want to testify, so we'll have an opportunity to debate this later on. So I appreciate you responding.
Well, always
Senator.
appreciate your questions. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you, Senator West. Senator Higginboo.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chairman, I'll be brief because we want to get on with these folks who all participate. Just one comment and one question. In terms of the comment, I also want to just commend you. Thank you for the effort and thought put in this. This discussion has been helpful in that, I believe. I love the fact that first and foremost, you're putting the kids first and thinking about them. And that's why I'm on this committee and really why I'm a senator, is thinking about my grandkids and all seriously, and all the kids of Texas. Appreciate the effort to try to balance between the idea we have to have audits and those kinds of things as taxpayer dollars,
Right.
but by the same token, protecting the freedom of private schools and the home schools. And it seems like you've struck that balance pretty well, but I want to listen and hear some more about that as we go on here.
Yeah.
I am concerned about this point you just brought up. Here was Senator West about open records. I don't think private schools or homeschools certainly would want to go too far with, but be careful about how much information they have to share.
That's right. I think that would be wholly confined within the application of the ESA itself, and it's not about opening up the books or accounting of private schools and all their other endeavors. It's specific to the ESA.
Very good. Yeah. Okay. The one question is it provides for up to 3% to administer the program, which 3% on $1 billion is about $30 million. And curious, just talk a little about how you determine that amount. I think you were alluded to it in that a lot of these other states didn't have sufficient administration to make sure that you weren't holding people up and there wasn't too much, that the system ran well. When you applied, it didn't take forever to get it approved and that kind of thing. So talk to that for a minute, if you would.
That's exactly right. So if we passed budgeting appropriation for the school choice plan itself, and it just dealt with what money does the ESA student receive, then we would have no framework whatsoever to make sure those students were successful, and that we could build the infrastructure and manage and prop up and operate a plan of that significant size. And if we can't do that, then we're setting ourselves up for less than success, right? So the percentage of 3%, for instance, as you mentioned, and there's another percentage of 5%, comes out of the total appropriation. So that would deduct from the amount that the Senate Finance Committee puts forward for us in the bill. That would deduct from that amount, and it allows for a prevention of what we've seen in other states. I mentioned over 160 empirical studies across the nation from all these school choice plans, and there were half a dozen that showed a net negative response. There were about 10 that showed net neutral, and all the rest of them were incredibly impressive. Those programs that showed a net negative response, they didn't set up a framework to serve the program. And so those dollars are specifically tied to the efficiencies of making sure that we can operate what 100,000 families would need to rely on in a timely fashion. Are the reimbursements running quickly? Are they waiting on a reimbursement 15 days? Or are they waiting on, the families don't get reimbursements, but the providers that they're relying on do. Are they waiting on that reimbursement 15 days, or are they waiting on that reimbursement for 7 months? You know, this is education, right? We've got to make sure that all of these students are placed and they're not stressed or worried about their new placement. Yeah. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. There's a lot of families have been waiting a long time for this, so having a good system that runs well is important. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Well, I appreciate your questions.
Thank you, Senator Higginbooth. Members, are there any other questions for Chairman Creighton? Senator Menendez, and thank you.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair. Sir Creighton, I've been thinking a lot about students with disabilities, and I know that prior versions of this bill, parents and students with disabilities would have had to have waived their IDEA protections and their free and appropriate education accountability and dispute resolution of appropriate services. And so the question is it true that they could be denied admission to a private school or dismissed from the private school based on their disability? And if that's the case, what recourse do the parents have if these protections are not in place?
Yeah, it's my understanding, Senator Menendez, that private schools across the state, they cover a wide array of services and supports for certain types of student needs. At the same time, they have to base their admissions and their acceptances and rejections on whether or not, based on the needs of that particular student, if they truly feel like they can serve them, right? They'd be doing a disservice to them if they accepted them and then months later into an ESA use, they had to pivot and reverse that. So you and I have had some great conversations on this. There is a difference between legitimate and reasonable rejection because they fear they can't do a good job, and then bias, and then discrimination, and then maybe worse. So it's because of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. If a private school is relying on a tax exemption, if it discriminates based on race in the admission standards, it could have serious implications for that private school.
Well, I appreciate that concern and that you looking into that. Is there a reason why the 504 students are not included under the definition of disability? Because my understanding is this leaves out children with dyslexia, anxiety, and other health issues that may require additional needs for flexibility and other accommodations. I think this is on page 1, the last line, where it includes disabilities that are included are audio or visual impairments, physical disability, intellectual developmental disability, emotional disturbance, learning disability, autism, speech disability, traumatic brain, but you did not include 504 students, so I'm just curious, is there a reason for that?
We did include dyslexia separate from the list of disabilities, and right in this legislature in the past session, we made some incredible changes for our parents with students with dyslexia pertaining to public schools and those definitions. Dyslexia is included in the bill, but 504 is very broad. I mean, it can be temporary migraines. It can be a peanut allergy. I think that if you and I could work together on the specific concerns for the class of coverage rather than necessarily relying on 504, I would appreciate that, and I know a lot of our moms and dads would.
I appreciate that. I agree, and we can definitely work on that. You know, we've talked a lot about the families, and I appreciate that because, I mean, we all represent families. One of the concerns that I have that I haven't seen, especially because their need is so great and because their condition tends to propagate the highest, promote, or they end up being in the highest numbers of homeless is our foster kids in Texas. Mm-hmm. They don't have parents who would, if we're the state and we're the wards of these foster kids, if maybe they're not exactly with foster parents, who would apply for them? Is there any way that we could put them in some sort of category where we give those children a chance to realize that someone cares about them, the state cares about them, they've set aside these dollars and they want to do something? I mean, I'm just thinking as you've tried to create these priority lists, that we could take into account foster kids.
You know, we have worked so hard to make sure that this is a launch, right? I mean, this is building a brand new program that Texas has never had before, and serving those kids, those foster kids with opportunities would be the highest priority for me in my office. We have a lot of work to do. But to launch a program and that we know that can be successful to serve you know, the kids that we've been talking about today across all categories, and to know that the classification of those kids and those students could continue to broaden, I would just hope that you would support the ESA overall and the legislation overall, Senator Menendez, so that we could continue to stand up for kids exactly like you're mentioning with those needs.
You know, I would be more than happy to support something innovative as this is after we fully support our public schools. I mean, that would be the priority for me.
So help us with expectations there. If it's full formulas and enrollment growth and a multiple X factor on what we've ever provided public schools as new money before, if those are the requirements, because those are historic and that's not good enough, please get me the rest of the framework, because we keep setting records here and we just can't quite impress you enough.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Members, are there any other questions? Senator King.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to follow up on the issue about disabilities with Chairman Creighton. And I say a little bit personal because I've got 2 grandchildren that have Downs, and they're in public school and in a small school district and just flourishing, really. But that may not always be the case. Now, I know in their case, their parents at some point might consider looking for an alternative, and I know without any doubt that they're not going to try to put a child in a private school that doesn't offer the specific services that child would need. They're just better parents and smarter than that. So, first question, am I correct that that's your presumption in this, that parents are pretty smart, and if they've got children with disabilities, they're going to, whatever that may be, that they're not going to try to place them in a private school unless that private school can demonstrate that they have the ability to meet that child's needs? I'm assuming that's kind of the baseline presumption that you have.
That is absolutely the purpose of the bill. Education freedom itself, the legislation's called that because our moms and dads are going to make the best decisions, much better than government ever would, on if it's public to public school transfer or public to charter school or homeschool or a specific private school that would meet the needs of your grandkids.
And are you also kind of assuming, because I am, that over the years to come, we're probably going to see some special needs private schools or hybrid schools that would work with homeschooled kids or kids that are wanting full-time in some private school? But are you expecting there'll be some creative opportunities that may come up where a school may say, hey, we're going to be a school district just to to serve families with down kids. And we're going to tailor that program maybe to meet their needs on a day in and day out basis that maybe come and go. A lot of things that you can happen with kids with different needs, whether it's low function autism or whatever it may be.
That's
Are you
right.
anticipating there'll be a lot of creativity and maybe some schools open up that specifically are targeting using this legislation serving special needs?
I am anticipating that, and I think we may have testimony today that will refer to more of those opportunities.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Senator King.
Okay, with that, members, are there any other questions? If not, we'll go on to our invited testimony. Thank you. We have two panels, plan to call